Hi, I'd like to welcome everybody to the MedTech Angels Explaining the Process of Engagement panel. We have a great group of panelists this morning who represent a broad spectrum of investors, angel groups to essentially retired investment banker. And I think we'll start off with brief introductions and then get into some panel Q&A, and then we'll save 10 or 15 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. My name is Brian Frenzel. I am a biotech entrepreneur and angel investor. Previously, I've done 4 startups, 2 of which were medical devices, and I'm currently the CEO of TOSC, which is a small molecule pharmaceutical company, and on the board of SanBio, which is a cell therapy company. I'm here today representing the Band of Angels, which is a 150-member angel group located in Silicon Valley. And one of our areas of interest is medical devices. So happy to talk to folks about how to engage Band of Angels, and we'll do a little bit on that today. Richard?
Yeah, hi. Good morning. Richard Koffler. I'm just going to say down, but I'm up from LA. I used to be a member of the Tecos Angels, which is a large angel group, 300 members, focused in Southern California, from Santa Barbara to San Diego here. But I'm actually no longer there now. For the past few years, I've been the CEO, founder of my current venture, which is called Green Wings Biomedical. In fact, what we do is incubate medtech companies out of IP that we find at research institutions or individual inventors. So we're the acting entrepreneur, translating the technology, the IP, from that lab stage into a FDA-approved commercial-ready device.
Thanks. Patricia?
I'm Patricia Beckman. I am the managing director of Wings, which is a medtech angel group in the Seattle area. I'm also the vice president of commercialization for Life Science Washington, which is the trade association for life science in Washington. So I have some sort of dual experiences that I represent. My major background has been in the area of biotech and pharmaceuticals. I spent the majority of my career at Immunex and Amgen, an inventor of one of their key drugs, but also working in a couple of startups in the diagnostics arena. So I'm here to represent our group, which has about 30 angel investors right now.
Hi, good morning. Laird Kagan. My firm is Kagan McAfee Capital Partners. I'm a generalist investor. I've been in healthcare a little bit. I currently am acquiring, in the final process of acquiring a medtech device company. I'll tell you a little bit about that story a little bit later. I was formerly investment banking. I was M&A with Goldman Sachs and then Drexel, and in 1990 started investing on my own. So I've been an active angel investor. I've been involved in about 40 investments. About half of those I've been active, very active, involved, either an officer or active board member. My focus has been on the capital side, helping the companies raise a lot of capital, leveraging my own capital. Today you might call my group a family office. About $1 billion of equity capital has gone into those companies, and about $2 billion of debt and joint venture capital. And I've been in a lot of different industries. A lot of the capital was in more capital-intensive businesses in the energy field, alternative energy, renewable energy, during 2002 to 2010, and been shifting back. I say I'm B to T, back to technology.
Chris? Oh, Chris is not here, sorry.
Chris
said at the end of the
coming
day.
shortly.
Chris will introduce himself when he gets here. He's running a little late.
But he's a nice guy, right?
He's a very nice guy. Why don't we open up to the panel questions right now? I think the first question that everyone in the audience would be interested in is exactly what do you look for in an early stage investment, an angel investment with your group? Larry, you want to start with that?
Well, as I say, I'm a generalist, so I've been involved in opportunistic investing where there's usually a very early stage opportunity to get involved in something that I think has some big potential, and where I think that my contacts across the industry would be very interested in investing. So I look for companies that have interesting opportunities at that time. The particular one right now is a medical device company that I've gotten involved in.
Richard?
Yeah, actually, what the sheet says is great. Do I look for great management? The fact is that no, we're in a different quadrant of the universe. We are the management in the deals that we get involved with, so we actually look on the inventor side as an inventor who doesn't want to be the management, who wants to be a PI, principal investigator, scientist, engineer, whatever science and engineering traits they bring to the table, which is what attracted us to that. One of the things, not exclusively to that, but one of the things that attracted us to them.
Patricia, you want to handle that question? Maybe give us a couple of examples of companies you're looking at right now or have invested in?
We look for passion, but we also look for people that have a great technology and are also, much to Richard's point, also able to be mentored, because many of our angels get very actively involved with the company, taking maybe a position on the board, but certainly being there to help direct things in various arenas. So I think that management is important, but it's more the attitude of management from my perspective.
Can you give us a couple of examples of deals you've gotten interested in or gotten into?
Well, we're looking at one right now. Well, actually, we're looking at two right now. One is a medical device opportunity. It's a first-time entrepreneur, but he is associated with his brother, who is an engineer, who designed the opportunity, and actually it fixes a problem a medical problem that his brother had. So there's a lot of intuition with the entrepreneur and the management that are starting this up. So that's an interesting one. Another one is technology that came out of the University of Washington. It's a company called Cyrus, which came from professor at the University of Washington, Dr. David Baker, who does a lot of work on folding of proteins and analysis there. So we look for someone who's really got the science down as well, but can put a team together or allow us to help them put a team together.
Chris just joined us. Perhaps we can back up a little bit and let Chris collect himself and introduce himself and the Life Science Angels.
Yeah, my name is Chris Apfel. I've been a member of the Carazzo Forum for 3 years and been the chair of the Life Science Committee over there, and then transitioned to Life Science Angels so that I became a real angel and saw the light of the day. We are interested in deals that have a reasonable risk-reward relationship and also should make meaning. So deals that really make a difference in our minds. And the due diligence process in our case is very different to how we do it at Carazzo. At Carazzo it's more formalized if there is sufficient interest. And at Life Science Angels, I would say we have many more individuals with significant domain expertise in the life science field. So that to kind of show the differences.
Chris, maybe you could continue. What stage do you guys currently get involved with the company?
There is a unwritten rule that is we get very shy when the pre-money is above 10, and there's a written rule that is at LSA we actually only invest as a group, and we want to have at least 150K. Under that, we then can do, of course, individual investments, but usually the investments are then end up to be somewhere between 200 to 400. Sometimes more, and we are also open for syndication if needed. And the way how this works is we have screening meetings every, I would say, twice a month. And so one is a device and the other one is a drug screening meeting. And then we have dinners every other month. And for those dinners, in those screening meetings, we look at 2 to 3 companies. We give them, I think, a total of about half an hour, including discussions. And then we select from that one, we propose 2 to for the dinner meetings, and one of them is then selected, and so it's every 2 months.
Is company location important to you? Patricia, if you want to handle that coming down from Seattle?
So I've been with Wings for about 6 months now, and initially, so Wings was started in 2010. There's 23 portfolio companies. It's the individual investors that actually do the investments. But initially, they were only looking at opportunities in the state of Washington. They didn't want to go any broader. When I joined them, I said that's not. There ought to be something a little broader than that, but we ought to have some criteria. So yes, company location is sort of important in that we want some kind of connection to the Northwest, but we don't have to have that. It's a want to have, but it's not an absolutely have to have. So we're looking at a company right now in Boston. They actually have a relationship with a strategic investor that is in Seattle. And so we will look for those kinds of an opportunity, but we'll also look for something where someone in the locale that the company is at can serve as our board members so that we can work through those people to keep an eye on the company more carefully. So we've broadened out our horizon, so we're not just doing things in Washington State anymore, because there's I think a good format where we can look at things in other places.
Laird, how about yourself?
So my contacts are very nationwide. I come out of the investment banking business and focus on the capital side. I've also been very active with micro-cap public companies. Taken about 12 of my companies public on the micro-cap stage and then grew them up, mostly went up through the NASDAQ or the Amex at the time. And so I look for companies all over. The medical device company I'm working with right now is out of Columbus, Ohio. Have companies in Texas and New York and Southern California. So been all over. I have two companies that migrated their way to India, but I didn't start there.
Chris, maybe you could address a question that I think for the group that invests $400,000 to $600,000 must be important. And that is, if the company is looking for much more than that, do you syndicate with other groups? How do you get the extra money?
Yes, we do. The way how it works is to provide really good diligence and then create also other connections and making introductions. So for example, I've led the due diligence efforts on a company called Mission Bio, which is doing single-cell genomics and in my mind, in our mind, has a huge competitive advantage. Without going into the technology, we actually believe that they are between the patient sample and the Illumina sequencer and enable on a DNA level in high throughput at an unprecedented low cost single-cell genomics, not only RNA transcriptomics, really DNA genomics. And last week we closed our 10 million round, and the way we did that is we had a couple of million convertible notes. Then at Karatsu we went through different chapters because of the due diligence report. They were also able to get investments from many other chapters. I think we must be probably over $1 million. We are. Then we have Karatsu Capital, which is a top-up fund for portfolio companies. And I think what has helped is that then strategic investors came in for the Series A, and one strategic investor wanted to come in with 5 million, but at the end of the day, I believe only came in with 2 million. So syndication is important.
Thank you. Patricia, how about Wings? Do you syndicate with other groups? Where are they?
We do. We haven't syndicated outside of the Seattle area in the past, which is something that we're just starting to do. But we do with TIE or TAGS. We have with Karitsu. We have with the Alliance of Angels in Seattle. Because we've got the medtech expertise. So if they see something that we haven't seen, they come to us and ask us to help them with diligence. So we don't go outside of the medtech arena. We do health IT, devices, or we'll do biotech platforms if it's something that could easily be turned probably within a 2-year period. So we end up doing more diligence for others and doing some collaborations where they may put some money in as well.
Laird, how about yourself? Having raised $3 billion, you must have a wide syndication.
Yeah, so, well, a lot of that was through investment banks. So a dozen of the companies were publicly traded, so we were able to use the public markets as our friend, if you will, to help raise capital. And there's a lot for a company that's growing and has a big upside. There's a lot of a broader range of investors in the public marketplace than in the private. So that's been very helpful. But typically, I've started companies just the way everybody else has, is with angel financing, and then moving up into some small institutions, and then if we go through the public markets. Let me take a second to talk about the med device company I'm working on. So this is a company that was founded by a surgeon in Columbus, Ohio. He started in 2007 with a disposable device that prevented fogging on laparoscopic scopes. And he raised about $1 million of angel money, and then he brought in some VCs and ended up having $35 million of VC money and $5 million of debt money. And last year, Canaccord Genuity was going to take them public on the Australian exchange. And after 9 months of due diligence and grinding them through the process, they pulled out of the deal at the last minute. And the VCs decided not to continue. They had $5 million of debt in front of them. They had a burn rate of $4 million. And it was running at about $1 million of run rate. It had FDA approval, CE approval in Australia. So the bank took it over. And in February, I started working with the founder. And we ended up striking a deal to buy all of the assets from the bank for $1.5 million. So we're rebooting the company now. We've raised $2 million of angel capital and $1 million from a strategic investor in China. It's a big public China company. They hadn't entered the China market, but it's a very big opportunity there as well. So that's an example of that. My anticipation is we'll get manufacturing going again in 6 months, and then probably look for $3 or $5 million follow-on, and that should be sufficient for that company.
Richard, could you tell us something about how you source your deals?
Networking. A lot of networking in the greater metropolitan Los Angeles area, which is bigger than most states. So there's a lot to go around. In fact, there's a friend in the house here that I network with, Llewellyn. And also with very heavily with all the tech transfer offices in the Southern California area. But it's not limited to that. Again, it's primarily networking. I used to be a member of the Tecos Angels, as I said earlier. So some of it trickles through there.
Chris, you talked a little bit about your due diligence process. Maybe the rest of the panelists can talk about the process of evaluating a deal and ultimately making an investment decision. Patricia, you want to start with that one?
Sure. Well, our process of screening is that deals come into Life Science Washington. So actually getting back a little bit to how we source deals, Life Science Washington has a very active entrepreneurship training program and mentorship program. So last year we touched about 200 companies that were starting up in Washington State. So that is one source of deals for us coming out of universities or serial entrepreneurs. But the next step of starting to do screening comes in the door. We'll oftentimes hold a 10-minute Skype with a company if they're not local, or have them come in and present to us with a one-page executive summary. We'll do this sort of thing every quarter. If we like them, we'll have them fulfill a larger business plan or a more detailed executive summary that our screening committee then evaluates. And the screening committee is members or are experts in areas of regulatory or manufacturing for medical devices. Could be engineers, could be finance people and lawyers as well. Oftentimes, not strictly are they always our investors, but they may be people that they rely upon. The screening committee then makes a decision what they want us to focus on. We usually see 30 to 40 companies per quarter that will come in the door. And very few of them are over the transom. So I would say that most of them are ones that we have been seeking out or having some kind of relationship with. And then similar to what Chris was talking about, we then look at about 4 to 5 companies per quarter that come in and actually present at our dinners with our investors. And then those investors decide if they have a particular interest in the opportunities.
Yeah. Richard, how about diligence? What diligence materials do you look for? I presume it's presumably scientific.
Yes, we do that, but the primary data point there is how much evidence does the inventor, the PI, have to show that this has the right direction of movement. I mean, many research, in fact, most research funded by the NIH at the research level is not going to go anywhere ever. And, you know, they come up with a theory, some hypothesis, and it doesn't really work out towards supporting the creation of a large, successful medical device company. So we spend time looking at that from the PI, how much data they've gathered already with that is meaningful, and much of what they have is not useful, but some is, and we look for that. And we also try to, you know, do the ultimate second guessing. If this gets translated into a device and you build it, will enough customers come and buy it so that there can be a good upside financially? Not only can you change the world, which you try to do, and the PI's been getting money from the NIH for that purpose all along, but so not only can you improve the quality of life and healthcare outcomes, etc., but you can actually create a big company. So some of it is provided by the PI, some of it we collect ourselves or through friends and acquaintances who can help us try to visualize this. Not the easiest place to be, but we enjoy it.
Chris, how important is it for your groups to have a board seat, to have a member or two actively involved with the company?
Usually we prefer to have a board seat as LSA members, and definitely when the investment is 500 or more. And we do think that's important because we have some domain expertise that often the company doesn't always have.
Laird, it sounds like you're running the show with your new company.
Well, with the new company, yes, I'm going to be the acting CEO for a period of time, and maybe for a long period of time. But in my case, it's a very active role, and I'm usually syndicating and bringing in investors that I know and are looking to me to be the person. So I'm usually always on the board, usually a very active role, and in the first year or two, usually very involved.
Patricia, you want to handle that one, that question?
It depends on how much we are investing in the company, how much they're raising, whether or not we're going to want to be on the board or not, or our investors are going to want to be on the board. I would say if they're not on the board, then they're actively involved with the company hand in hand with the management.
We talked a bit about what people are looking for, but are there any major turnoffs, things that are kind of deal breakers as you're going through the diligence process? Richard, you want to?
Obstinacy, you know, stubbornness, the PI, inventor, early stage talent, thinks that he or she is entitled to the truth just because they were the originators of the invention. That's almost axiomatically a deal killer with very rare exceptions. So that's a turnoff. The other turnoff is repeating what I said a minute ago, is that this looks like a very promising intellectual property, but the upside is limited. In fact, I had a project which I love to pieces to this day out of a children's hospital in LA and USC. And I spent, you know, probably more than I should have, but over a year and a half trying to figure out how we could turn this company into something big, and I could never figure out how to make this company bigger than a few $1 million a year in revenue at its peak. Nothing that could ever attract capital or anything else other than the fact that it would make the world a better place. So we just have to walk away from that. So that's the other one, the runway towards a large company that will bring a return to the investors that we're bringing in to move the project again towards an FDA approval and commercial readiness.
Laird?
So my first foray in the healthcare space was in 1995. I got involved with a brilliant scientist out of the University of Wisconsin at Madison who was focused on the genes of aging. And I think he was 20 years ahead of his time. But he had a lot of good ideas. I helped syndicate $2 million for him to get going. And I would just echo what Richard said, and that is he just absolutely wouldn't give up a controlling anything, and didn't want any investor to come in and tell him what to do. And no new investors ever came in.
And I can also add to personality, you also need to develop trust in this individual. So the one deal that I brought to LSA recently that was presented last week at a dinner meeting, and then we had a subsequent due diligence session. It's a CEO who was able to get the device close to 510K, who has been able to do 2 clinical trials already, and that for a pre-money of about 7.1 million. So it's really great performance. It must be a huge market of about certainly 2.5 million patients, and there is a clear path for revenue visible. However, during the due diligence, when we were talking with him, we were asking for further information, and we felt that often his responses were overinflated. So he was saying, oh, we will most likely also sell 2 or 3 devices to a doctor's office. And there is no way that the doctor's office would need 2 or 3 devices. They would only need 1. There were a number of statements were just overinflated, and we also then wanted to review the business model, the Excel sheet, how is doing the projections, what are the assumptions, how is the sensitivity, how will this kind of take off, and what's the go-to-market strategy. And I've asked him for the Excel sheet for several times so that I can look at it. I haven't received it yet. And if somebody is not willing to share information, or you get the impression that the responses you get are biased, and he's withholding information that may be disconcerting, but he's overinflating statements otherwise, it's almost a deal killer. Almost. I mean, the opportunity is so good that we still will look into this deeper, but it's a real red flag.
What about investment time frame? How long do you expect to be invested in a deal before you get an exit? And how important is the exit plan when you look at a deal? Patricia, do you want to take that?
We like things that probably will have an exit within about 2 years, which is why we don't tend to look at biotech deals. Another thing, getting back to something that's very critical, as Chris was indicating earlier, we don't like things that are above about a $10 million pre-money. Would prefer something around $2 million, because I think that's our sweet spot. But we do like to look. Many of the people that walk in our door oftentimes haven't even thought of an exit plan, and so we oftentimes are trying to formulate that with them, because they're very early entrepreneurs that walk in our doors.
Laird?
So I always start with the exit. So
Yeah.
if I'm going to get involved, so how am I going to get my money back? How are the investors going to get their money back? Where do we think the exit is? And then I look to back in to say, okay, how many rounds of capital do we need? How much money? Where's the capital going to come from at every stage? Is it legitimate that a milestone is going to be created every step of the way for whatever money is going to be needed in a series of financings? I mentioned that I've utilized the microcap public space in sort of pre-2008, before the crash. That was a very good time. There was a lot of hedge funds that wanted to get into growth capital companies, tech companies. And so in a number of those cases, we were public within a year or two. I would typically be involved for 5 or 6 years trying to build the company and not be selling out. But our investors had the opportunity to get some liquidity. Today, that's not as easy. And I guess my involvement has been 3 to 10 years in various companies, and investors have had various exits along the way.
Perhaps I can talk a little bit about the band of angels on these issues. We have 7 special interest groups, from high tech to software to clean tech, and one of them is medical devices. I would say it's the one that gets the most interest around the table, and not necessarily the most money. And the way the investment process works is you either come in with a sponsor, someone who is willing to stake their name and reputation and agree to be involved in some way, at least investing, or in the process of evaluation, people who are willing to take on the sponsorship role emerge. And the first screen is by the medtech group, the special interest group, which has got 10 or 12 members. And if it gets through that and gets a recommendation to go to what is a monthly dinner meeting, then there's another selection committee that selects among those recommended. If you don't make the cut the first time, there's usually a chance to come back. And The deal is syndicated around the table internally. Everybody bets their own money. But we oftentimes work with Life Science Angels or Keiretsu Forum or Sandhill Angels or even Tech Coast Angels down in the LA area to put together a syndicate either based on their due diligence or based on our due diligence or joint ideas. And that process takes 3 or 4 months and a significant amount of time on everybody's part. I guess maybe we could talk a little bit about the medical device environment and what you see in the future and how things have changed. Is this going to be an attractive area going forward? Patricia?
I think it's definitely going to be a strong area moving forward. A lot of the coalition of different opportunities, I think personalized medicine and some of the medical devices that are associated there, where a lot of the therapeutics are going to be kind of winnowed down in terms of their applications. I think that some of the other aspects of the diagnostics are going to be much, much stronger. So I think it's a great area to get involved in.
Chris, what do you see on the horizon for medical devices?
So if we include diagnostics in medical devices, I think one of the challenges that has become more and more apparent is that if we're talking about personalizing therapy with genomics, that you actually need to develop strategic alliances with drug manufacturers or big pharma. And the reason for that is the pathway, the development pathway goes hand in hand with the FDA approval. And if you tie it to that, then it's a much longer pathway. Also, if you have a diagnostic device that doesn't demonstrate an improved outcome, you may actually have a difficulty getting it reimbursed. So there are also some challenges in that regard. It may not be, even though, let's say for medical devices, let's say laboratory developed tests do not require FDA approval in general. So it could be an LDT, laboratory developed test, that is going through the CLIA approval process. And so you can sell out right now immediately. The challenge is, if you go down this pathway, you say, oh, this is quick and easy, and I can get to the market. But then you have another barrier to entry, and that is you don't really have much to show for, and you really have a hard time to sell it. So even though the CLIA process looks like a shortcut, these shortcuts, I feel, do create more blocks than really pass forward.
Richard, where do you see things going? You're involved very early on, right out of the early invention process.
So, well, I'm going to demonstrate our bias towards the type of things we look for, and we see that, and obviously you probably see the same thing, that the future is primarily using algorithms, call it whatever you want, machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, better ways to do things. That algorithm software, in one word, is going to continue to propel where we go in every single area, whether it's to analyze, sense, respond, create feedback loops, closed loops, etc. So we look at only the IP we look for is algorithmic, right? That's actually all we look for. So some of the other interesting things that my colleagues do, we stay away from. So an implantable prosthetic is like completely uninteresting to us in and by itself. So we see that the future is there, and we look for IP that has those characteristics around which you can create a medical device, whether it's a software-only clinical decision support system, for instance, or it's a hardware-software device where, again, the foundation of the innovation, what makes this different from existing things or what now allows an unmet need to be met is wrapped around the algorithms, the intelligence, the software.
I guess I could comment on that. I did my first medical device startup in 1988.
In the morning?
In the 8 o'clock in the morning. I can't remember the date though. And one of my lessons learned from that process is the environment can really change. And I think it got very adverse with the FDA during the mid-90s with Kessler as the head of the FDA trying to make devices into a pharmaceutical type of regulatory process. And I actually had one company that had to sell out early because of that, because a 510K got turned into a PMA for an endometrial ablation device. I think now the FDA is much more benign and helpful. They have ombuds people who are there to help small companies. And particularly with the current administration, I think they're probably going to get beat up to get things on the market faster. On the other hand, there's just an unbelievable proliferation of micro niche type devices, some of which are very expensive, many of which are very expensive. I just don't see how these small incremental advantages the market can afford to pay for going forward. So I think cost consciousness, cost effectiveness, actually reducing the cost of care is probably one of the things that will be demanded in the future.
Yeah, can I get a comment to that? It's actually, and this is not limited to medical devices, but it actually applies to pretty much any early stage invention. That's timing. And it's not so much, not limited to timing like the FDA's temperament for making your life miserable or not, but timing in the market, like go back to the example, the USC CHLA technology we looked at, which was specifically to algorithms to produce personalized optimal drug dosages. And the problems created by poor dosing is a multi-billion-dollar headache in healthcare. However, it's diffuse, so very few people understand it. And the doctors themselves, being put on earth by God, they think that they never make mistakes. It's the other guy who made the mistake. And there's a timing issue here. So this device today, well, it would be a medical device, although it's a software-only device, would not get acceptance in the market, and that's why it will be a pushing, a wet noodle to get it into a big company. Although I think that sometime in the future, maybe 5 to 10 years, this will be standard of care, and it will be a big business. But I can't predict whether it'll be 4 or 7 years, or 10 or 9, and that kills the deal because of the uncertainty about the timing as to when this will be accepted by the practitioners, which means that they will be purchased by the providers and therefore will make a business behind it.
Perhaps an extra comment to that.
Say what?
Perhaps I may offer an extra comment on that. If you look through the FDA approval process for drugs, you have the phase 1, that's primarily safety, then phase 2, where you try to do some dose response, and then phase 3, where you usually are required to have 2 independent pivotal trials at a certain dose. And so that's where actually it starts. As soon as you get your FDA approval, phase 4, you are supposed to do some kind of market research on whether there are any other adverse events that were not observed before that. But once a company has FDA approval for one dosage, the company never ever goes back and says, well, for certain patients, could there be a lower dose that is equally effective? Or do certain patients would need a higher dose? Because there isn't really a market, and the cost for that, to increasing costs are kind of prohibitive. And so because the FDA approval is for one specific dose, the application that you're talking about that could make a lot of sense would only have a chance if you get the FDA behind you. So if you work with a regulatory agency and you kind of shop this process around and get them excited, then you can have for drugs that come on the market where dose plays a big role, then I think you have a leg up with your company.
Well, actually, not to debate the point in front of the room, but it turns out that the FDA is not the problem here. The problem is the practitioners. You can take the package insert data, which is where all the dosages are presented to the public, after it becomes available in the market. And you can actually live with and the pharma company also has all the pharmacokinetics data. The reason why they provide you a dose is because there's no software practical way to tell the practitioner what else to do. So yes, in the future, the FDA will propose a PK model that will be embodied in algorithms, well, they'll be delivered in algorithms like the one I talked about, but we're not there yet. But on the way that you don't need the FDA to approve it, what you need is a doctor to say, yes, this is going to make a difference because I need to. But again, they say, he made the mistake. When he killed the other patient, it wasn't me, so what do I need this for? And move on.
On that happy note,
But-
I think,
Yeah.
But I would debate as well that personalized medicine is going to
No, it's a
make
great-
a huge a part in all
It
of
is.
this because we're all a little bit different. So there will be significant differences. So I think it is something that is going to bring us back to that component as well.
I
Sorry
think,
about that.
I think this is a great discussion, but maybe should be in the next room where the biopharma.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's a good-
One of the things that we haven't touched on is health IT, which is some of the things that we actually do investments in as well. So I think that actually is an area where there's a lot of pull from the insurance companies to try and find some opportunities. And so I would say that probably at least half of the portfolio that we are looking at investing in right now are health IT companies.
Thanks very much. I think we have a few minutes left, and happy to turn things over to questions from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Just a question to all the panelists. Oftentimes when we do early investment, it's the
Speak louder
founder.
so that we can.
Can you hear?
I'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
Okay. So oftentimes when you deal with a funder who is a technical person, so do you insist that they have a complete team, including CEO, COO? And if that's not the case, then how you transfer scientists into an entrepreneur? I mean, company manager, which is totally different mentality. And when will be the cutting point? Say, okay, I can never change you. I mean, then.
That's a great
Yeah.
question. The issue relates to at our stage of early investment. Do we look for a complete team? If not, how do we look to help the company to build that team?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
So I'll give you two short answers. I'll wear my angel hat, and I'll wear my current hat, which is incubator. On the angel hat, I almost prefer to see a shorter team. I mean, cleaning up a bad team is atrocious. In fact, frequently a deal killer. Oh, my cousin is the CEO, and I'm exaggerating here. I took my classmate, and all of a sudden they have a CTO, a CEO, a CFO, a CEO, and quite frankly, most of them are useless or counterproductive to boot because all sorts of factors. So in some ways, it's better not to have a fully formed team if the fully formed team is really not that good, which frequently isn't at those early stages. On my Green Wings hat, we actually don't want the team because we are the team. We will become the team. So we want the inventor and PI to be an inventor and a PI, not a management team member for the execution side, except for the science and the engineering.
I would add that very, very few scientist entrepreneurs can turn into CEOs. I'd say it's about 10%. And they have to be those people who are particularly open to being mentored and taking next steps and wanting that kind of a challenge. So, much like Richard, I would say I'd rather have a very sparse team that we can help them fill in.
Question in the back?
You mentioned the potential of the opportunities being important to you. You talked about big potential, limited upside. Is that revenue alone or revenue in market? And could you provide some numbers for us to help so we understand the size we're looking at?
The question is market attractiveness. How do we measure that? Anyone?
Well, you try to see for the upside, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, talking for my little part of the world, we're looking for early exits. We're looking to have a very modest budget, which is primarily towards product development and regulatory approval. So we're talking about way under $10 million to get us through that hurdle, based on the devices we look at, right? There's a correlation there. And then we're looking for an early exit, which is going to be 3 to 4 years later. So yes, there has to be some belief that on the other side of there, when whoever acquires you, and it could be one of those logos there, puts that into their product portfolio, this if one day will become $1 billion division, will be long gone from them, but it provides for them an attraction to give us a good return at that early exit stage. But that's just for our little world that we look at.
I'd make a comment, having been more on the entrepreneur side than in the VC side, always syndicating transactions. And I would say the angel universe, starting with the Band of Angels in about '94, when they started, they had a thesis that was basically putting the early money in a deal that the venture capitalists would come and support and grow. And what happened is in 2000, when the shit hit the fan, the VCs weren't playing nice anymore, and mostly the angel investors got crushed. They had pay to play, and they just wiped them out. So the angel networks, I think, took a different position, and I think I've heard this from people at the band and other places, that the focus is more on smaller companies, early exits, no VC money required. Let's put in $1 million and have a $20 million or less exit. And I think I've heard that on the healthcare side. I've heard it on the other side, where, hey, we just want to build something Google buy for $20 million and be out. And so I've seen a real shift in the angel groups and where that goes. I've been looking at trying to create larger dollar opportunities and going public, even if going public in the early stages. So in order to attract investors in the public marketplaces, I think you have to have a larger, bigger opportunity, one that is certainly multi-hundred million of market cap to get people's attention. So I don't know if any of the other groups want to comment on that.
Chris?
Yeah, so what I find important is that there's value created that brings the company forward, because if there is a real market need, and that is a big need in terms of dollars, it's very likely to, and the technology can work, it's very likely to create a lot of upside. The challenge is that we then see many applications that talk about $1 billion market, and then when we talk about $1 billion market, they include the whole global market. And it's not necessarily the total addressable market, it's a kind of the market of the disease, or not necessarily for the diagnostic. And it's kind of frustrating when you have entrepreneurs or startup companies that are approaching us by inflating what the real addressable market size is. Also, for these large exits, as you pointed out very rightly, you need significant follow-on funding. So what is important in my mind is, does it really address a significant need? If it addresses a significant need, there will be a market. And whether the market is 100 million or 1 billion or 50 million or 200 million is not material. What really matters is, in order for the exit, in what range would the exit be? How much capital do you need? If you think about exit divided by capital, that's kind of the average multiple you can expect. And the multiple you can expect is something that is relevant for the deal. Is it realistic? And in our angel community, I often feel that there's this 10x magic number. Everybody wants to see a 10x. And especially for life sciences or device deals, if you're really conservative, if you're really realistic, you may only get to a 4x or 5x or 8x. And what then happens is that we on our side often say, well, then is it appropriate to take that risk? And what I think is, what has hurt our perception in this regard is the report by Robert Wilbank, which I recommend to everybody, on returns on angel investment in groups, that actually shows that you have about on average, a 2.9x return, 2.7x return after 3.9 years. And if you are doing thorough due diligence, by weeding out companies that may not make it, and the failure rate is in a range of 50% or higher, by weeding out those companies, you increase your potential multiple to 5.9x after 4.1 years. And 5.9x is a sweet deal on average. Now, what is also in the report, I think it's mentioned in the report, that the majority of these exits were coming from companies, the majority of the profits were coming from companies that returned 10 to 30x or 30x or more. The challenge is, in the life science space, you don't have that, because there is a difference, as Peter Thiel says, between the bits and the molecules. The market that is dealing with electronic, with bits, Google, Facebook, that's very easily scalable, has a very different dynamic. as opposed to when you are developing hardware, when you need to go to regulatory approval, when you need to have a sales force. You will not have those multiples. And what I think is happening is, because that analysis from Robert Wilbank has actually both components, it doesn't differentiate between different sectors. I do think that this conclusion is heavily biased towards the Web 2.0. And so I do think in the life science deals, we may actually pass a very good deal that's very well developed, that makes a lot of sense, has probably fairly low risk for the upside if it has only a 4 or 5x return, but the return is likely to be very likely. So one shouldn't look too much on the return. That was going a little bit too far off the tangent on should be the market size be, but it's really a question of multiple and can you penetrate the market.
Thanks very much. I think we're out of time. Great panel. Thanks for the active Q&A from both the audience and amongst the panel members. And I think we'll all be around the rest of the day, so if you have further questions, just approach us and we'll try to do our best. Thanks very much.
Thank you.